who is the big winner in the Adam Thielen, Jalen Coker moves, fallout. That and more this week on the couch. It's here. It's week 1. So we bring in royalty, Lord Reeves himself. We're going to go deep, but also the journey is just beginning. And before it even began, Jalen Coker, new slot receiver for the Carolina Panthers, because Adam Thielen's back in Minnesota. Jalen Coker on IR. Is there anybody from Minnesota or Carolina that looks more attractive to you in the wake of this madness?
Well, the obvious one is, just what the spike does for a guy like Teterow McMillan, obviously being the round 1 pick. He got a little bit of discounted this year, I think, because of what happened to Marvin Harrison Jr. last year with the elevation as a rookie. Like, from an archetypical stance, you would think that they're similar types of players, but McMillan has a lot more in his profile, like breaking tackles and playing some power slot stuff than Marv ever had at Ohio State. Also winning in the contested catch game, he was actually better than Marv was. In Ohio State, we saw a lot of the issues that Marv had from his tape as a prospect be kind of problems as a rookie. Then it was, dogpiled onto that, with, what Drew Petzing did with that passing game and what Kyler Murray then was forced to do when opponents knew that they were going to throw. But kind of the one thing with Tet was like, all right, well, year 1, is he going to get kind of pushed to like this prototypical X spot, because they have Thielen in the slot. Obviously they have Coker and they have Legette, like all these guys that can move around. Is it just like a year 1 thing? Like, hey, we're going to have him learn a position. Now Thielen's gone. Now Coker's gone. And it's just like, all right, he has like this pipeline, because he's not going to be like a 50% slot player, but if we can get him like 20 to 30% in the slot, like that's a significant boost for getting him more free squares and creating him, opportunities to have targets that come with a high success rate. And I believe he can create with those. So that's like the biggest one. I had firmly kind of believed he always belonged with like that wide receiver 2 bucket of guys that like kind of had question marks anyways, the Garrett Wilsons, the Marvin Harrison Jr. we just talked about. I always believed he kind of like was more exciting than those picks, and you were able to get him kind of around after those guys. And I think that ended up he got pushed there in the 11th hour. I will say for like week 1, like DFS purposes, like streaming purposes, obviously now Xavier Legette is like on the board, because his best stretch last year also came when Thielen was out, after that Thielen injury, and he started to get access to some of that, those easier types of targets too. So he's also going to be able to moonlight in there too. I think that we'll see Carolina move those guys in and out of that spot. So Legette becomes like an interesting DFS player, or streamer in your deeper leagues.
Mm-hmm.
If you're kind of fishing for a guy, he becomes interesting as well. But obviously Tet is, I think, the biggest winner.
Yeah, like you said, 20-30% snaps in the slot. One of the things that for a while, Rich, was kind of an obsession around these parts, and then now have faded. I feel like the pendulum swinging back a little bit more specialized players in the slot, like Hunter Renfrow, who is going to soak up some percentage of those snaps that Thielen and then Coker vacated. Is the idea of teams playing their best wide receiver in the slot, like whatever role he's prototypical for in the prototypical offense, you play your best wide receiver in the slot. And we're hearing, I think the Saints, there's more of that with Chris Olave potentially coming.
Oh
And
yeah.
and if the Panthers, like you said, if they're not just saying, well, this is a learning year for you, Teterow McMillan, and eventually you're going to be our Mike Evans, and instead say, no, you're our best wide receiver. We're going to get you where it's easiest to get you the ball, in addition to you learning that position. That could be that. And you're right, there's a tier of receivers, Xavier Worthy, Jamison Williams, George Pickens, like you said, Garrett Wilson. While Terry McLaurin was holding in, he was kind of in this group where there's this wide range of outcomes for these guys. They could end up being top 10 wide receivers who we pick in the top 15 picks overall next year, or they could be guys in any given week we're not quite sure if we want to start them. Like one of the things with Jameson Williams, I'm going to get your thoughts on this real quick. Is it crazy to think that Isaac TeSlaa could be fantasy relevant this year without any injuries in the Lions passing game?
It's probably a little bit tougher, just because I think I look at the Lions from like a top-down stance. Obviously, they scored 18 touchdowns over expectations last year. We know there's going to be a little bit of regression there, even if they kept everything at face value from last year. Then you compound things. They lose Ben Johnson. Frank Ragnar retires. Zietler leaves in free agency. There's just a lot of moving parts here too. Like there's a couple teams like this. The Buccaneers are also another one of these teams that even at face value, if they kept everything as is, there was going to be probably some top-down regression and then you compound like all the moving parts that they also have. So when you start to get to like the third and fourth target of like the offense, because guys like Amon-Ra is still gonna be the focal point of the offense. Still, he's still gonna lead the team in targets. But when you start to get to like the David Montgomerys, right, like even to the potential of like Jamison Williams or Laporta, there's probably some henpecking for there, or maybe just be like a rotation, right? Like you might see a it be game plan dependent, like who's the two for Detroit. But when you start to get to like the 4 and 5, like the TeSlaas of the world, it's harder to like really kind of lean in to say like, all right, there's standalone value here. Obviously, if the Lions are that much of a juggernaut, there's that opportunity. But I do expect them to have some recoil this year. The schedule's harder too as well for them this year. They don't play as many indoor games, which is kind of like everyone was going on about getting them last year, and it did work out that way. But I do think that there's going to be a lot of moving parts and some push and pull there. It is interesting too. You're talking about like the stuff with the slot stuff. It's the NFL is so cyclical, right? And we had that big boom when like anti-fragility and zero running back for fantasy was popping off, right? And obviously, what did Matt call it originally? Waldman called it. I forget what he labeled his version of
The
it, but
upside down draft.
upside down drafting. But there was a reason when you look at like around like 2015, 2016, when that really took off in fantasy circles, that also coincided with the NFL, playing more spread offenses, getting indoctrinated into the NFL, more wide receiver threes were on the offense. And we also had like a really depreciating talent pool of running backs. And now the NFL's kind of come around full circle. Defenses got lighter. They started playing sub packages, and offenses were like, oh, you're going to take away vertical shots from us. What are we going to do? We're going to now play heavier sets. We're going to move our wide receiver one around the formation. He's not just going to be a prototypical X wide receiver. We're going to give him targets near the line of scrimmage. And now it's kind of hurt like the slot only dependent guy, because we're seeing a reduction in like 3 wide receiver stuff because tighter splits are getting run. We're seeing more 2 tight end stuff. And now that wide receiver one is moonlighting in. So now those players like that we know are talented, right? Like a Khalil Shakir, a Josh Downs, a Jaden Reed, even before the foot injury. Like these guys have been impacted because they're only playing, 70% of the snaps now, because teams are only playing 3 wide receiver sets so often now. And they were getting limited from a fantasy stance of like over the course of a season. Like these guys are losing like 100, 150 routes to some of their ADP peers because they're only playing in these specific situations. So it is interesting to see how the NFL's kind of come full circle. And like we always find these things because cover 2 and shell coverage wasn't introduced these last 4 years. Like it was a counter to it was a counter to what offenses were doing. And now offenses have said, well, how do we counter punch back? And we're starting to see that. And the talent is better at running back, and it's like kind of come full circle. I joke because running backs were like popular. It was cool to draft running backs again in fantasy. Like Dexter's good again on TV.
Yeah,
it's
right,
like maybe TRL will come back. Like who knows? Like it's just crazy. We're going full circle here.
Don't throw away your jean jacket with the back patches and the pins. Who was on here? Did you have a denim jacket?
No, I never was really into.
Did you have like a jacket where you wore like pins or patches or anything like that?
Yeah, we used to do a lot of the pins. Yeah.
That was, we were cool. The 90s kids were cool. We were actually cool. I had a Kiss Destroyer back patch on my denim jacket. And a couple things I want to touch on. Detroit, and you're right to say, hey, Detroit, let's slow our roll on Detroit. And I think that narrative, Rich, in September is going to take off because they're starting out with at Green Bay, Chicago, at Baltimore, Cleveland.
Mm-hmm.
And then they get Cincinnati, and then Kansas City and Tampa Bay go into the bye. But you mentioned the issue about indoor games. The good news is that weeks 15, 16, and 17 are all indoor games for them. Actually, weeks 12 to 17 are all indoor games for them. And it's Giants, Green Bay, Dallas, Rams, Pittsburgh, and Minnesota. So, Pittsburgh, Minnesota are not great defenses to finish with. But at this point, I'm just curious with TeSlaa. Johnny Morton wanted to make this a more vertical offense. And what does he get now?
Mm-hmm.
Like a guy in place of Tim Patrick, who is truly a vertical threat right away. And maybe that could open up some dimensions. And like you said, with offensive line, be watching Tate Ratledge and Christian Mahogany, those guys stepping in to those spots that were opened up. But the copycat league thing is fun, or the wave, the pulsating wave. There's people will always come back to like, why football? Because really, I don't know if you're that different than me, Rich. Like there's probably like 4 or 5 sports that I could have been this obsessed about and made it my occupation to just navel gaze and create content and all that stuff. Why football? And there was a Chuck Klosterman piece on ESPN, Page 2. Remember Page 2? Remember blogs?
Oh yeah,
ESPN
yeah.
had Hunter Thompson wrote for Page 2. Page 2 was cool. It was legit. Grantland was, there was that phase, you know. And Chuck Klosterman, I think the book's called Walking the Dinosaur, had a bunch of short pieces, and he took an excerpt from that. It basically got at the idea that football's always changing. It's always changing. It's anything within the rules, like with the A11 offense, anything that you can do within the rules is allowed. And one of the things I'm going to be watching, I brought this up a couple of times, Bobby Peters, I think, is the guy. There's so many great football thinkers on Twitter now, by the way. Like we had our little, there's the beat writers and the insiders, there's the fantasy world. Now there's football theoreticians, you know, coaches, and there's a lot more of like high level football talk going on. And I think it was Bobby Peters. I might be wrong. He's talking about clusters, Rich. I don't know if you saw this talk.
Mm,
Clusters. So not bunch formations, but
right.
but clusters where the receivers are, say, 4 or 5 yards apart, and it's a little more amorphous, and it creates a situation where if the defense is playing man coverage, well, you set all kinds of picks and stuff up at the line of scrimmage, and if
Yeah,
they're
because pattern match is such big, the Fangio pattern match stuff, and that's how you combat that. That's how you confuse pattern match.
exactly. So that's you understand, right?
Yeah.
And they're saying like this is coming. This is what's coming. Is instead of these formations, even formations with motion that end up at another formation, you're going to have receivers. And what's the implication of this? Well, when we get these guys, they're like, well, they can't play outside or against press coverage. They need a clean release. Well, everyone's going to have a clean release. Everyone's going to have a clean release, right? Because you're going to be in these kind of amorphous, 3 receivers spread out over about 10 horizontal yards at different depths. And then when the ball snapped, the defense isn't going to know what's going to happen.
Yeah, I
And
mean, that's what makes the Seattle hire a little bit interesting, and because on the surface, you look at the Clint Kubiak offense and you think Jackson Smith and Jigba and Cooper Kupp, the archetypes that they are, and you're like, how does this fit? But it's not that it's a slot receiver. Their outside receivers are still running tight, condensed splits. It's not like he's louned at like Cooper Kupp's not going to be like 6 yards off the sideline, like
no,
trying to beat press coverage. Like that's not what's going to happen. Even though things get labeled as zone coverage or slot inside out, like there's all these other layers of nuance that don't get covered in that. Like you said, we can easily say like, hey, this team was playing cover 4, but it's obviously match inside cover 4, and there's man principles involved in that. So
yeah,
it is interesting. It's great to see how far everything's come, but there's still so much more underneath the surface.
right. And then there's the reaction to the reaction, right? Like,
Yes.
okay, and that's why following the draft really closely, teams have thresholds, right? Even like the hand size threshold or length for quarterbacks, arm length for tackles, right? And it wasn't that long ago, Rich, that if a linebacker was under like 225 or 230, forget it. No way. And now everybody has somebody that's like a safety linebacker tweener, often one of the most important roles in the offense.
Everything's gotten lighter and leaner in the
Right.
NFL. I mean,
Yeah.
even doing I've done the prospect work, and it's like, we've had to adjust so much these past 5 or 6 years for size for players, just because everyone's getting lighter and leaner.
Yeah. And then eventually, like you said, we're going to establish the run more. Let's talk really quick on one of those that crosses over, because you mentioned Seattle and Clint Kubiak. And one of the things that, and we're going to get into like some good red meat week 1 takes. I'll just serve them
Sure,
up
sure,
and you
sure.
spike them down. But I do want to ask you first a specific question and then just a general question based on that. One of the things that I saw as a theme that came out of coverage this summer is that, wow, the Clint Kubiak running game is installed and it's ready to kick some ass. Like they're ready. Now, Kenneth Walker only practiced 4 times this summer. Zach Charbonnet, they gushing about him. They're like, this is their guy. We want our. This is kind of like whenever Liam Cohen was talking about Bucky Irving after the draft. Like now, Kenneth Walker is an incredibly talented running back, and in a properly functioning Clint Kubiak running game, like we're going to see him get to heights that he has never been to. But he only practiced 4 times this summer, and at the end of the summer, I think Mike McDonald saying like at some point you do have to show you can do it on the field. There's only so many times that we can just say like, oh, walk through reps or whatever. So at ADP, Rich, at ADP, are you putting a chip on Walker? Are you putting a chip on Charbonnet? Or maybe neither?
I think it's, and not to take a cop out here, but I think it's team build dependent up into that point when you start to get to the draft. Because obviously Charbonnet fits a specific build. Are you a little bit thinner on RB2? Are you taking more upside darts at that spot versus if he's your, a pure bench player, right? And then Walker is kind of in the same boat. Like, are you looking for like more upside out of your RB2 and are willing to embrace some of that volatility? Because some of the missed time is also due to his style of play too. He's one of those players that puts his own body at risk a little bit with his own play style. But I do think from an upside stance, I still like at face value with no cost involved, I still would want to bet on Walker in this scheme. I think this is the first time he's actually played in a rushing scheme that is, I think that can accentuate like what he brings to the table. Like he is a player that wants to drift. He wants to kind of find stuff behind the line of scrimmage and then hit a tarmac and take off. Where Charbonnet is more of like, he wants to get downhill. He wants to hit holes. He wants to thump you. So it is a kind of a fun blend that they have too in this system. It's also fun too, the layers of week one. Obviously Kubiak playing against the 49ers and Robert Saleh, who comes back to San Francisco. They're familiar with each other. 49ers literally have like 5 new defensive linemen this year. A lot of the youth movement. I saw Fred Warner's their oldest starting player now on defense, which is wild. We've got a few matchups like that. Like Ben Johnson's getting his first start against Brian Flores, a person he's familiar with, right? Like we've got all these different layers in week one, but I still do think, going back to the Seattle situation, that if dollars or donuts, everything works out in an apex outcome, that Kenneth Walker is set up to really, really thrive this year. Obviously, we price in other things that come with it, the missed time.
Right.
But if you were just to say like at face value, I think he's set up to have the best year of his career if he's on the field.
Yeah, two potential league winners. And I like the way you brought up about team builds, because if you're doing hero running back or zero running back, Charbonnet's perfect. You want a running back you can get outside of the top 6, 7, 8 rounds that has a chance to change your season. He's got to be, and maybe Trey Benson too. As guys that if everything lines up for them, look out. Okay, large question. What is the most prominent things you can think of, Rich, that changed for you over the summer? Like camp started, you had your position or your general idea, and now here we are on the other side of camp in the preseason. Season's about to start. Tell me some of the things that changed the most for you as you were absorbing all of this information over the summer.
Yeah. I came on with you. I'm trying to think of when I came on. I think it was just like kind of like post draft.
Yeah.
When we came on, and we were just starting kind of like some of the off season stuff. And I think for me, it's not so much like it changed my priors. It's I think there's 6 teams that we know inherently could be good and potentially be league winning offenses, but they all have like this like layer of like combustion to them.
Mm-hmm.
I think the Chiefs, the 49ers, the Dolphins, the Cowboys, and then I think the Buccaneers and Lions all fit kind of that mold, where we're going to be looking back and saying that, yes, it was obvious that we should have been buying teams and just buying the team environment for a few of these spots. But I think we're going to look at a couple and be like, that was a complete Lucy in the football team that we just completely just tried to kick it. And like, there's a few of these teams I think that are just going to be really disappointing this year from a fantasy stance, but we keep chasing kind of these outcomes. Like the Chiefs in general, like we just keep saying, oh, well, they're going to have all their receivers healthy, right? And they're going to finally push the ball downfield again. And then here we are starting the season where Hollywood's missed the entire preseason. Rashee Rice is going to be suspended the opening 6 weeks of the year. And it's like, are we back to square one? And the opening month, the Chiefs face nothing but good teams. Like really good opponents. And it's like, are we going to see like the high flying Chiefs again? Or is that just something we're going to chase forever and say, a decade from now, like, wow, it was really obvious they had a Hall of Fame Tyreek Hill and a Hall of Fame Travis Kelce at the apex of their careers that was just never going to line up again. Like, is that something, right? Like the Miami Dolphins are a big card reveal team, I think, in week one. And, obviously Tyreek and Devin Achane haven't played in the preseason. Is this offensive line going to hold up? They're going against, a Colts team that has a lot of moving parts on defense. They bring in Big Lou instead of Gus Bradley. They spend a lot of money on the defensive side of the ball. They get Charvarius Ward. They get Cam Bynum. They already had a pretty good defensive front as well. Like, is this defense going to be set up to be better too as well? There's just a lot of those spots. The Cowboys, obviously, now with the offensive line, the backfield. Now you trade Micah Parsons. We don't know when Diggs is coming back. I mean, there's just a lot of these teams could topple over, on us.
Sure.
And it's
Yes.
and then you're like,
Yes.
it's yeah. So I'm looking at a lot of those teams, and it's like, yeah, the Buccaneers are another one of those teams. Like, obviously, they get the layup against, we think looks like a layup on paper against this Falcons team in week 1, but then you go to these next 7 weeks that Tampa Bay has, and it's like an absolute nightmare for this team that's, losing Liam Cohen. We don't know when Tristan Wirfs is coming back. We don't know when Chris Godwin's coming back. Jalen McMillan's going to be out the opening half of the year. And you look at it, it's just like they go at Houston, against the Jets, then the Eagles, at Seattle, the
Yeah.
49ers, at Detroit. It's like, this isn't fun. Like, this is not fun.
No.
Like, so yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily changed my priors, but it's just been kind of open to, like, there are a few teams I think just have a really wide range of outcomes from a fantasy stance. Like, I think a lot of these teams we think from a win-loss record are still going to be largely okay. Like, the Chiefs are going to win games. Lions are going to end up winning games still. Maybe not so much the Cowboys, Dolphins, but like, the
Yeah.
wide range of fantasy outcomes though. For
Yeah. Well, what I get out of that is, like, in the words of the dude, you keep your brain limber. Like, you have to be, and I have been talking about this. I try to hit on it almost every show, that the most underrated fantasy football skill is reacting validly to the first couple of weeks and the information that some people will say, I need more evidence before I act on that. And some of the week one and two outcomes, we will look back and say, well, it was because it was extended preseason. And we can inform ourselves to know that too. Like, some of these new offenses like Jacksonville, Chicago, like, they may stumble out of the gate. It doesn't mean that's how they're going to be all season. It doesn't mean that Carolina's defense is good if Jacksonville looks rough in week 1. Carolina's defense could still be bad. But you're right that we need to contextualize this. Like Kansas City, I saw someone put out there this idea, and they didn't put it this way, Rich, but this is to piggyback of what you said. I mean, the Chiefs, are they just a defensive team, and where none of us are acknowledging it? They're a defense-led team. Detroit's going to be interesting with Johnny Morton. We've talked about that. Miami, I think, is a team that could just turn into careening over the cliff, on fire, totally collapse as an organization. Dallas, you bring up with Micah Parsons, I think it was a Bill Barnwell tweet that with Micah Parsons, they had the highest average EPA per play as a defense, and without Micah Parsons, they had the worst. I mean, it was that stark. It was that
Yep.
simple. So I think one team you didn't bring up is Cincinnati. You brought up Big Lou, but you didn't bring up Cincinnati, because I think Cincinnati and Dallas are going to be really interesting, because when fantasy, you're like, well, the defense is bad. That's great. If the defense is bad and teams can grind out 6 and 7 minute drives and cut down the number of possessions, because isn't that what do they say? Oh, how do you beat this quarterback? Just don't let him get the ball. But really, you go against Cincinnati. Did you see Chris Rodriguez? Did you see some of these preseason runs where it looks like the Cincinnati defense is going to have trouble just getting off of the field? And that can matter. That can cut into bottom lines. Tampa, you mentioned, and Rich, you got to tell both sides of the story, though, because I'm a Baker Mayfield guy. Tampa, after that brutal stretch, and boy, it is brutal, they're going to hopefully in week 9, after they play New Orleans, they'll have a bye. So coming out of week 10, they should have all hands on deck, one would hope.
Mm-hmm.
And they finish with New England, Buffalo, Rams, and then listen to this: Arizona, New Orleans, Atlanta, Carolina, Miami, Carolina. Whoa. I mean, that's like all bottom 10 defenses. Now, on paper going into the season, but still.
Right.
I mean, even just the finishing with Atlanta, Carolina, Miami, that's championship winning stuff. That's Baker Mayfield accounting for 4 or 5 touchdowns in each one of those
Yeah, that's
games.
if you're I mean, so if you didn't invest in Bucks, they might be like in season like buys, especially
Yeah.
if they run into like a little bit of a down swing after this, after week 1. And they might even be a little, because there's so much in motion. Josh Grisher has talked about them. He also wants to throw the ball vertically, even though, you go back to last year, what kind of unlocked Baker was just getting the ball out of Baker's hands, right? Because quickest time to throw since his rookie year. And Baker in general, I think, got a bad rap. I think, he is more or less good football on his career resume than bad football. It's just, obviously the one lost year between the Carolina Rams and then the year where the year after they made the playoffs, he played that whole season with that injured shoulder. But the last 2 years, he's been a really solid player. I think that he's not just like this vagabond, right? Like
No.
he's a player that has good football. He was the number 1 pick for a reason, and
Right.
he's not like Zach Wilson coming out and like turning it around basically.
No.
Or even I would say Sam Darnold, like,
No.
he's a lot better football player and has more football good football on his resume than bad.
And productive football for fantasy, and they let him play. He had 16 interceptions last year, but we would all agree he had a very good season. They let him play right on that
Oh yeah.
edge. And he has said that part of why this has happened is that they let him be him. Like, they want him to be him. They're not trying to make him into somebody else on the field or off the field. So, this is why George Pickens is fascinating to me now that he's in an
Yes.
organization where he feels loved. So I love that idea, though, that, hey, there are some offenses that have a large range of outcomes, and getting those first 2 or 3 data points, adjusting for schedule and what we know about the opponents, we should then be able to get something predictive, and then act like all of us, Rich, like all of us in the content creation. I hate that term, but it applies. Like week 3 or week 4, we should have a robust list of buy low or sell high recommendations. We should be able to tell people, act like, this is not going to last. This is going to last. And here's how to sort through it. But let's just narrow to week 1 right now. Let's just look in a week 1, because I think in a week 1 lens, we draft our teams with the idea roughly that the earliest drafted players are going to be the ones that start. But then when week 1 arrives, we may look at our rosters and say, wait a second, am I drafting somebody that I'm putting on the bench that I drafted like in the 3rd, 4th, 5th round? Am I starting
Yep.
somebody? So let's talk about these guys. You mentioned Devin Achane. I think he worked off on the side. We're recording this Tuesday morning. And you can always say conditionally, like if he gets in a full practice or something like that. Any hesitation to play Achane against the Colts this weekend?
I don't think hesitation to play him, but I think from a holistic stance, we should anticipate that the Miami Dolphins are going to at least proceed with a level of caution, or at least if we want to assume rational coaching to this degree. I mean, by all accounts, everything was precautionary. Obviously, they don't have to report any truth to that because it's preseason, so we got to take their word for it. But if you're the Miami Dolphins and you know that it's week 1 and you have this player that has had a history of injuries, going back to Texas A&M, and you don't have Jalen Wright, it's like, are you really going to push this player with an 80% backfield share in week 1? Like, you still have to think about the big picture of the NFL stance. So I do think we will see, Ali Gordon working maybe in like short yardage situations or just specialists, right? Like if they're long down and distance, you might see Achane catch some stuff. So in a full PPR league, I still think he largely is still going to have a floor. I think what we want to see revealed, though, is that first time Miami Dolphins are inside the 5-yard line, what happens? That's what we want. That's what we want to see, because last year, when Raheem Mostert was healthy, he out-touched Devin Achane inside the 5 still. And, no matter what Tyreek Hill said about coaching the team, about,
Yeah.
pulling Devin Achane inside the goal line,
Right.
I always was entering the season, like, wondering, like, was it still always kind of in the air? Like, are they going to use an Alexander Madison here? Could they use an Ali Gordon here? So that's what I care about, because I know that he's going to catch passes and we're going to get explosives from Devin Achane. I want to know is he going to run into any type of hindrance amongst ADP peers of inside the 5-yard line stuff, right? Because that's how you save bad games as a running back. Josh Jacobs did this several times last year, where from an efficiency stance, not that great. But you get in the box 2 or 3 times, it's going to be all right for fantasy football. And then Devin Achane has been a player he's been such a robust touchdown scorer that if you remove any of that, like, that could injure him a little bit. So that's what I'm looking for.
Mm-hmm.
I still would lean to start him. It is interesting, though, like you bring up, like the offseason ADP versus like week 1 ranks. I'm doing my week 1 ranks now, and I have so many guys where it's just like, yeah, he's a better start in week 1 than where he was going, versus this player, James Conner, right?
Sure.
Everyone has told you at all offseason, it's like, hey, if you're streaming defenses, get the Cardinals. And all I kept thinking every time I said that, I was like, oh, James Conner's about to cook then, open the season. And to me, James Conner's one of these guys who was going like RB 15 to 18 range, in like the 4th, 5th round. And like, I have him ranked over a bunch of dudes in week 1 that he went behind. And it's just like, yeah, that's just the way the game is played. We're playing in ISIS. We're trying to win weeks. We're trying to get We're trying. That's what it is. It's still a weekly game when we get there. And this is my favorite part about fantasy football, is we could get removed from this top down where we just look at like bulk product, or like try to project these season numbers for a player. And it's like, we look at like just this is what all the stats mean. But we know that, fantasy football is not like on a bell curve. Like, it's sporadic. Like, there will be player, you might average 15 points per game, but you might have a 30-point game, a 10-point game, and a 5-point game, like mixed in there. And that 30-point game is still going to be more pivotal than the 10 and the 5-point games, because we want to win weeks. There's a number of guys, I think, when you look at it, like I didn't get all the way through receivers by the time we did the show, but there was like a whole pocket of running backs where it's just like, like James Cook, against Baltimore. How good do you feel about that? Breece Hall against the Steelers. How do you feel about that? DeAndre Swift against the Vikings. How do you feel about that? Tony Pollard, who everyone loved, getting the bump at Denver in
Yeah.
week 1 with the rookie quarter. How do you feel about that situation? Murray and Hampton against the Chiefs. How great do you feel about that? Like, you got Kyron Williams against the Texans. Like, it's just like a whole bunch of these spots for these guys. It's like, ugh, that's not very fun. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. It's a fantasy football skill to be able to see those things. Like, and it sounds like you're saying be aggressive with James Conner. Like, I don't even know if it's an interesting question to say.
Travis Etienne is probably the best one, right?
Right?
You
Well,
get Travis Etienne against the Panthers at home, week 1. Who are you starting? Where does the line drop to who you'd consider benching Travis Etienne for?
well, probably. I mean, see, I'm just not a Travis Etienne guy, but I think
Sure.
this is one of those situations. One of my little fantasy football sayings is like, if you're not going to start him this week, when are you going to start him? Like, it's very
He gets
possible.
Bengals
Well,
week
yeah,
2.
well, I guess that's true. He does get the Bengals. So we're going to have this thing where, because they're starting, so this is another good point to bring up with schedule,
Yep.
because with Jacksonville, because what I understand about Jacksonville is like, Liam Cohen's scheme it's pretty complex and it's going to take time, but they're going to start out with Carolina and Cincinnati, and everyone might be, oh, Liam Cohen, genius, Trevor Lawrence, but then
Remember last year's Saints?
right. And then the next 4 weeks are Houston, San Fran, Kansas City, and Seattle. And at that point, we were like, this is a disaster. Liam Cohen should have never been higher. But the reason we're talking about this,
Yep.
folks, is we can give you our specific recommendations. I do this, I wouldn't do this. But don't get too hung up on that. No, and I talked about this with Jason Wood last week. We're all going to be so wrong about so many things. I mean, it's guaranteed. 40% of the things we said are gonna look, but then like wait a couple weeks and they might look right, and then a couple more weeks, and it's those windows and understanding that, and the schedule often gives us the hint of when those inflection points and changes will happen. All right, so we talked about James Conner. We're aggressive on James Conner. He should start strong. Might even be a Trey Benson what the heck flex week. Let's talk about some other running backs. What about Isaiah Pacheco on the other side? This was like a no news is good news summer for Pacheco. Like, he's just
It
going to come.
was.
So what about Isaiah Pacheco in Brazil against the Chargers?
Yeah, that's an interesting game altogether, right? Because on the surface, you might say it could be maybe an potentially underwhelming game, right? Like last year, they played two kind of slog games. Obviously, there was an impact. The first game was impacted by a number of things. Neither Rashawn Slater, Joe Alt played in that first game. We obviously want to have Slater back here. That's the game where Rashee Rice gets hurt. Pacheco's out for that game. And then we also have this element of like, what if that field's just not is the same
Right.
state as it was last year? I mean, we saw and it was Eagles Packers. Like, there's a lot more maybe players they're turning a lot more explosives than we have Chiefs Chargers, but 27 plays or 10 or more yards. We had 12 plays of 20 or more yards in that game because nobody could stay on their feet in that game. So I'm interested to see what that field's going to look like if they made it any calibration to the surface that they played on last year. We could definitely use it though for that game, absolutely, because we're trying to get our pulse right. Pacheco is a guy that I ended up coming around on as it went on. Like you said, it was kind of like the no news is bad news. But then it's like when you look at it, like the first 2 games last year, everything we wanted for Pacheco was there, and he was a guy going in the second round at the end of last summer. We saw him get 85% of the backfield touches in week 1 prior to his injury in week 2. He was over 80% again. It was over 100 yards from scrimmage. And then with the rug got pulled on as he comes back from the broken leg, just isn't the same. The offensive line is a disaster. He walks back into too. That looks better on the surface. Obviously, we know the interior is still good. And then we'll see how strong Josh Simmons is coming out of the blocks. But the offensive line on paper looks like it has a very low bar to clear from where we finished with the Kansas City Chiefs offensive line in 2024. So I came around on Pacheco. Definitely a guy I think where if you drafted him probably as your RB3 in some spots, you'd be really comfortable still playing him as an RB2. Especially with the situation with Rashee Rice, we figure that they are going to try to run the football more too. That's just an interesting team in general. Like I said, the Chiefs, what do they look like? It's still Matt Nagy. It's so like, it doesn't really change for them, with no, and how does Xavier Worthy,
Right.
look, does he pick up where we left off? Are they able to kind of rebottle that? What does it look like, with Hollywood Brown? Are they going to play a lot 11 personnel? There's all these kind of questions here. And then the Chargers in the same vein, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you don't have Rashawn Slater. Now, granted, they do have the luxury of moving a really good player to left tackle, but that also means it's like still a domino effect. They're moving Trey Pipkins up. to start at right tackle. This is a guy that had an opportunity to start and lost his starting job in the NFL already. You add Keenan Allen to the fold here. What does that mean for like the usage of Ladd McConkey? I think it could be an overall pro because Ladd McConkey is a guy that can win everywhere. He wins outside, inside. He's not tied to the slot. He's not one of those guys we talked about earlier. Like he's not dependent on the slot snaps. Him getting to play more outside snaps may actually elevate him for fantasy football because he might get more like those targets that come with a little bit more like a fantasy fat or high cholesterol targets, right? And that could help a guy like him. And the Slater injury could just really injure the running game in totality. And maybe they just start throwing more because their best players, Justin Herbert and Ladd McConkey and Keenan Allen, and they want to run the offense through them too as well. So that exists the range of outcomes for the Chargers as well in this week one. Then we have the Najee factor too, which no one knows how to handle.
Yeah, and that's a great. I mean, I love the way you lay that all out. The first thing I want to say is when you say a field that nobody can keep their feet on, that sounds like a Ladd McConkey 200-yard game.
Oh yeah,
that's like put your money on a McConkey to break the scoreboard. But when you were talking about the Chargers offense, one of the stories to watch is how much was the Justin Herbert injuries last year keeping them from running the offense with him they really wanted to. And it's fun going back and forth with my guy Scott Barrett about how Jim Harbaugh just gushes and gushes and gushes about Justin Herbert. I mean, like, Chuck Norris stuff, just the way he talks about him. And it's a psyop because Justin Herbert is actually a pretty shy guy. He doesn't want the spotlight. He's not comfortable in that kind of position. And I think that just Jim Harbaugh wants to show him like you are deserving and that's where you belong in the spotlight. And I think the offensive scheme could correspond to that, really putting Justin Herbert in the spotlight for fantasy in a way that we aren't conceiving. We're thinking of more of a ground and pound offense. And then with the Chiefs, like you said, are they ever going to turn the corner? Are they ever going is something we think of this as a fantasy gold mine, but we haven't adjusted to the last couple of years where it's been more like a garbage dump, or like a thrift store. And there hasn't really been a lot. I mean, was Rashi Rice, but I want to talk about high cholesterol fantasy targets. I love this. I don't think I've heard you say this before. I
it's what I've used before.
I like fried foods. Is this like the fantasy version of fried foods?
Well, I mean, we know like the best wide receiver ones tied into something we hit upon earlier in the show. Like we want to have like those free squares a little bit, those targets that come with like a really high success rate, right? Like those slot targets. Like Jamar Chase has been kind of the antithesis of like where the NFL's gone. If you think about Jamar Chase as a rookie, just this dynamic lid lifter. He's just pummeling teams downfield. You can't keep a guy behind him. And teams started to adjust and started to take away some of that vertical stuff that Chase was dependent as a rookie. And and I have given Zach Taylor a host of shit in my past.
Yeah.
But the one thing he's done has been like consistently been like, hey, I know I need to get that dude the football. How can I find ways to do it? And consistently, the Bengals have altered their approach at Jamar Chase and used him in a capacity that's adjusted with the way teams have countered their offense. And that's what we need from our fantasy wide receiver ones. That's why Ladd fits this archetype. That's why we've seen guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown, Boom, even guys that had short-lived things like a Michael Thomas or like even the Cooper Kupp explosion here. You want to have that blend of a guy that's getting those, like I call them like the free squares, the high success rate targets, but then you're still winning. You're getting you're just not living off of those. You're getting those plays that come with the end zone targets, the shot plays, because those are where like the fantasy spikes come from. So you want to have that marriage, and that's how the NFL wide receiver one has transitioned, over the years. And Ladd fits that to a T. I've said this before, and I take a lot of grief for this. There are three receivers I think could be on the Antonio Brown spectrum, because Antonio Brown was like, when I think of that archetype player, it's like a player that wins in every capacity. He can win inside, he wins out, he wins the football in his hands. And he was also awesome on special teams too, but these other guys don't really have that because that part of the game's changed. But Malik Neighbors is like the first guy that stands out as just like a player that wins in all those areas. Ladd McConkey would be my two, and then my pipe dream is Josh Downs. I still think has that ability, but he's just roadblocked in the system he's in. I don't think we're going to see that this year either. I think he's going to still be a slot dependent largely player, maybe not, but I do think that there's gonna be a point of Josh Downs' career when he gets to just be a full-time receiver. We're going to see him really excel, and we're gonna be like, damn, this dude is really good. But those would be the three guys that definitely fit like that mold.
I like this idea of the player that can win in every way. And I think bring up Indy really quick. It's so sad. Indy is like, I mean, I think,
Just sad.
well, what's sad about it is I know like canned food usually means like in your bomb shelter or something, but I know that there are those canned like delicacies like shellfish and things like that, right? And like that's Indy's offense, but they have no can opener. There's nothing they can't, and you have, Tyler Warren and Josh Towns. Adonai Mitchell apparently had an incredible summer. Like every report out of Indy is that he's ready to blow up. Of course, Michael Pittman is good. He's playing with a broken back. Well, not really a broken back, but painful back condition last year. Alec Pierce is really good at the thing that he does, and they have Jonathan Taylor. You would think this offense could be a perfect storm. But you were talking about this profile of the kind of receiver that's going to blow up. And I'm going to take this back to week one. And going back to the topic of, well, we drafted this player in this round, but for the purposes of ranks and lineup setting. Rich, is there any way you can leave Emeka Egbuka out of your top 10 this week?
No, I mean, I don't have my top 10 because I still think Big Mike's gonna be the firehole guy, but this is obviously the runway for Emeka Egbuka, right? Like it's the perfect storm. He's gonna be probably the most player based on cost in like your DFS this week, where he ended up being priced because the pricing comes out so early. Obviously, we're not gonna have Godwin, Jalen McMillan goes down, and then you get this Atlanta Falcons matchup. I definitely still have Big Mike up there though, because like I said, I believe he's the fire. I think he's the foxhole guy, and we know Big Mike gets the end zone looks. But Egbuka, I actually have him when I ranked him. I have him at 20. So maybe you said like I'm too low. But I mean, obviously he was getting drafted like a little bit below that and then way earlier than that. But he's definitely, I believe, a locked-in starter.
Well, that's the thing. He's one of those guys is you have to tell me it gets tough. I mean, it's really tough. Like if someone said Emeka Egbuka, and I love George Pickens this year, or George Pickens against Philly, I'm not
Right.
sure. I mean, you think about wide receivers you drafted in like the third, fourth round. I'm not 100%
There's a
sure.
couple of those guys, I think, in week one, as you looked at layout. I mean, I was pretty bullish on what the big picture season could look like for Calvin Ridley, but am I excited to play Calvin Ridley at Denver in a
Yeah.
quarterback's first career start? Like, yeah, absolutely not.
No.
Like, absolutely not. We talk about Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson somehow everyone ignored what's happened these 3 years and kept drafting me at wide receiver 12 to 14. And like he opens at, with Pittsburgh. And it's like, how excited are you to put him in your lineup in week one? I mean, there's a lot of guys. And then you talked about like Chris Olave a little bit earlier in the show and the usage we expect for him. He actually gets a really favorable spot. We get this Jonathan Gannon, which is inherently a passive defense. They want to play off coverage. They don't blitz a lot. We got Kellen Moore, who's going to give Chris Olave probably his highest share of first read targets he's ever seen. He's going to move into the slot more against the zone-based defense. Yes, the quarterback is a concern, but we could have a situation due to game script where we look up on Monday, Chris Olave had 14 targets.
Right.
Like pretty easily, I think. Like, it's like he pushed double-digit targets. And granted, we're always going to do the touchdown game probably with the Saints. Like, he might be a guy that only scores 4 to 6 touchdowns, big pictures. But if you're in these full PPR formats, Chris Olave is a guy that came out looking a lot better than his ADP, like in my week one ranks than his ADP was. Like, there are a number of guys where I'm like, he looks like a way better start than this guy.
Yeah, exactly. No, but that's what's really fun about transitioning the way we are right now and all the fantasy football players is, like you said, draft, big picture, range of outcomes for the whole season. Now we're focusing just on week one, and all of a sudden you might look back on your draft and say, maybe I didn't have this right. Maybe I should have thought about once we're down on the ground week to week, what it looks like to have these players where we're instead focused maybe too much on the 30,000-foot view stuff. Okay, so
I
just
don't even have Chase wide receiver one in week one. So,
wow. I mean, well, and I guess who is it? Is it not
I mean,
CeeDee
his
Lamb?
history. I mean, obviously, we have the early season Bengal stuff. That's the
Mhm.
obstacle we have to get over. Like, obviously, that's why these guys played in the preseason this year, is they're cognizant of the early season struggles they've had. Jim Schwartz has given Joe Burrow at least
Yeah,
like his handful, like in his career. Like Jim Schwartz has given Joe Burrow a lot to deal with. This Browns defense also was still. If like from a talent perspective, they're
they're
good.
good.
They got
They're good.
pieces
Yeah.
still. It's just that they were put in an impossible spot last year. Maybe they are put in an impossible spot again, and that exists. But and you look at Denzel Ward. Denzel Ward individually has given Chase a lot in his
Mhm.
career
Mhm.
to deal with so far. He has 100-yard game against the Browns in his career with Denzel Ward playing. So it's like I look at some other guys, like I think Brian Thomas Jr. in week one. is like an absolute smash, especially following Liam Cohen's commentary on Travis Hunter to open the week. Nico Collins, I think, in week 1 in this Nick Caley offense against this Rams team that had really a lot of issues. That's why they wanted to they were in on Jay Alexander, and they didn't end up winning that Jay Alexander sweepstakes. But this is a team that needed a cornerback. I look at Nico Collins week 1 in a game that could be a lot more competitive and maybe higher scoring than people think too. That game could be fun. And so I like Nico Collins a little bit more too.
Sure.
Not that I'm down on Chase. Obviously you're starting Chase, but it's just like the context of I think given a DFS setting, I'm more excited for those two players.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, even just the guys you talked about Mike Evans. Okay, so just before we go off the rails, I just want to get the classic cold, cool, lukewarm, warm, hot. Hot being better than cold, obviously, of how you feel about starting these players in week 1. So we can
okay.
So let's start with rookie running backs. TaVion Henderson.
I'm lukewarm, I would say. Let me know the practice reports of Ramondre the rest of this week.
Yes, I like that. RJ Harvey.
I'm more mild on him. I think we're going to see a slower run out for RJ Harvey. I mean, you work with Cecil, so you probably know a little bit more. But I do think early in the season, we are going to see a little more Dobbins than Harvey work. And just because Harvey comes from this Gus Malzahn offense, which he wasn't asked to do a lot of NFL things. And it's not his fault. It's not his fault. He was playing in the system that was designed for him in college, and it got him drafted higher than maybe some people thought he would. But I do think there's going to be a transition. He's probably not going to play in pass protection, but I think that's actually good for him because when you look at because we always talk about third down snaps, running backs actually in terms of league-wide targets have a higher share of targets across the league on first and second down than they do on third down. It's almost like a 10% difference. And Sean Payton's going to put RJ Harvey in a position to where the touches he gets early in the season are going to be RJ Harvey types of targets. It's going to be in space. It's not going to be all these things where he's not going to ask him to run between the tackles, right? And he does get this matchup, 8-point favorites at home. I think it's just going to give Sean Payton maybe some opportunity in the second half to maybe just give almost treat it like a little bit like the exhibition period.
Sure.
So, but I do think that we're going to see Dobbins get first crack at goal line, probably be in on the early install of the base offense. And then if we get a lead, we get some more opportunities for Harvey as the game progresses. But even going back to, Alvin Kamara, that first month of his rookie season, now granted that was on a team that had Adrian Peterson as well. And then he got traded and that was kind of the unlocking for Alvin Kamara. But, very limited touches. We've seen Sean Payton with rookies before. You require a slower run out. So a little more mild for that. I think TaVion's going to be a little bit more involved week 1 than Harvey will, unless the game script allows, they're just beating the Titans down.
Right. Totally. It might be the answer, someone says Dobbins or Harvey this week, both.
Yeah, it could just be both.
They both get the opportunity. Ja'Cory.
Because also these rookie quarterbacks have been absolutely horrible in week 1, going into the 2000s.
I know. You're going to feel sorry for Cam Ward at some point in this game. You're going to let's be like Rocky, throw the damn towel. Just let him sit for the rest of the game. So, okay. A couple more names I want to make sure we touch on. Ja'Cory Croskey-Merritt.
Not that excited at all. Ooh. And it's a bummer because this is a player I was hammering, and we're in a league, in the Dynasty League, where I drafted him. And I did so many Dynasty Leagues. We talked about him earlier in summer. We were like, he's going to end up when they are in pads, they're going to like him. And look what happened. Remember we talked about this. We're like, when they watch all these backs play, they're going to be like, how do we stop him? But for fantasy football, there's a couple of obstacles for him. One is the money touches. He is in a situation where he might not have access to goal line work or receiving work. Also, one of the teams I think is going to be a lot better, and I don't know what's going to translate to wins, but I think the Giants are going to be a really competitive football team this year. Yeah. This defense is going to be really good. I think their front seven is going to be really good, and I think we're going to see that right away in week 1. So if Ja'Cory Croskey-Merritt in week 1 is only reliant on rushing efficiency to get by for fantasy football because he's not catching passes and maybe doesn't have access to goal line work, that's, I think, a tough spot right here for him against this defensive front. I think he's more flexy. I think you need a touchdown from him this week.
Okay, couple receivers, couple second receivers. I just want to get in. Ricky Pearsall.
Again, another guy, even though I was high on big picture, I think it's more mild. This is another team, even being higher on being kind of the resident, early gamer, the content creator that was saying, you need 49ers this year. Why the hell are the 49ers favored in this game? In Seattle, this is another defense. I just have too much respect for the Seattle defense. When they were healthy last year at full strength, when they had their secondary on the field together, and obviously they add, another pass rusher in DeMarcus Lawrence. Like when their defense was healthy last year, they were a top 5 unit. And Ricky Pearsall, I think, is going to get schemed up targets, but like this is still, I just have a lot of respect for Devin
Yeah.
Witherspoon and Reek Woolen, and like this. I'm coming in more mild. I think it's more of a Kittle CMC game if you're latching on to 49ers.
Yeah, and I take out of this, Rich, from the larger perspective, good defenses. I mean, you favor defenses earlier in the season anyway, but especially good defenses. You expect good defenses really to be able to put some of these offenses in a chokehold and just just take the life out of them. Like that San Fran Seattle game looks like one of those 9-6 kind of games on paper.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's just, there's going to be some of that.
I said the dynamics too, the Salah, Kubiak, like
Yeah.
the chess games are fun because these dudes, they know what you're
Yeah.
signing up for.
And they're going to face each other 2, maybe even 3 times. Really quick, just give me like a one or one sentence answer to this one, because I just want to make sure because it touches on another one of these offenses that's tough to solve. Rome Odunze.
I'm a little more optimistic on the Bears start because I was going under the hood of that game, and Brian Flores was kind of scared of Caleb Williams last year a little bit. Like he did not blitz him at all. And maybe it wasn't that he was scared of him. He just wanted to put him in a spot to like saying like, "Hey, I'm going to make him beat me." But he did not pressure Caleb Williams at all last year, even with that offensive line. I like what I saw from Ben Johnson in the preseason from the way he utilized Caleb Williams because we talk about the free squares for like the receivers and stuff, but in offense, playing with offensive leverage and being able to, and what I mean by offensive leverage is the defense has to respect the run and the pass on a certain down and distance, right? And that's what Ben Johnson was so good at creating and maximizing Jared Goff with the Lions. And the under center passing game, and seeing Caleb Williams in the preseason under center for 50% of his dropbacks, like I'm like, all right, I like this. He's going to put him in a spot where at least, Caleb, they're going to be playing with, again, like I said, that offensive leverage. And I think when Ben Johnson's able to do that, that's when he starts to like really get in his bag and he's scheming up stuff. Now, if the Bears are in 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8 in this game, you don't feel as good. But that also tied into Rome too. So Rome, as a rookie, was put in this spot where he had nothing but those high cholesterol targets. And they came with such a low success. He had to live on that. His whole diet was candy bars. And like, that's why he wasn't a good fantasy player, because you're not healthy. You're not healthy when you only have candy bars. And like, it was, and that's what happened to him. And I do think that we're also see Ben Johnson tie into some of that offensive leverage stuff. We're going to see Rome not be a guy. We expect us to see what George Pickens too, right? Like just not have to live in that capacity. And we saw a little bit of that in the preseason with Rome. Like, he gets it's a preseason touchdown. We don't go crazy about it, but like he just wasn't doing that stuff his rookie year, like running little hitch routes and like getting those like those little bunnies. So I'm a little bit optimistic. I think that game could be gross, but it also could end up being fun as well.
Yeah.
So
I'm going to look into what Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams could do. Like you said, under center. Actually, DeAndre Swift is a player that we may be rethinking after that game.
He had the Pacheco, the same thing that we talked about.
thing,
Pacheco kind of happened for DeAndre Swift.
Yeah, and Swift, you could even have more pass catching, and he actually had a pretty good season the last season he was with Ben Johnson. Okay, abbreviated off the rails because we have so much to say. We had a fun time when you came down here for the Super Bowl, you and Chris and Justin and Ian. And next time around, Rich, when you come with your family, you will definitely practice the New Orleans ethos of it's a marathon, not a sprint. And certainly the season for us is a marathon, not a sprint. What do you do to keep yourself fresh? Like, what do you do so that you don't run out of gas by the time we get to week 18?
I think the one blessing and curse that I have is that my kind of signature content piece in the space, being the worksheet, is something that always allows me to dial in because it's focused on these things we talk about. It's always looking at kind of the macro this week, winning this week, and like looking at recent trends, maybe not season long stuff, how things match up. And that's always been it's been refreshing every week. Like you said, we get on the conveyor belt every week of the season. And yes, we are recycling it. We work in a space where we pour everything in all week, hundreds of hours of work, and we start all over. Not all of it's worthless come Monday, and we start back over. But just knowing that I get to look at fresh things every week, it's invigorating. It makes the game fun. It makes the game new. It lets you to find these edges in DFS or like prop betting and all these different angles. But yeah, I would definitely apply that logic. My one New Orleans trip not to play your fantasy season
Right.
this way.
Right.
Absolutely. I will say too, this is, I think, bar none, the most excited I've been for a fantasy season. Then since I've been a content creator, at least. Maybe not since my playing
Why?
days, but
Why do you think that
as a
is?
I think for a couple reasons. I think one, offenses started to find answers. I think we're going to be back on the upswing of like getting back to an offensive meta when we were coming out of a defensive meta. I also believe the offensive talent on offense is as good as it's been since I've been a content creator. I think when you just look at it, the ADP or like the top 2 rounds for fantasy, I think were as good as it's been since I've been doing this. Maybe the top 48 too. You extend out to 4 rounds was just really good. And what that did is it allowed a lot of creativity in team building this offseason. I don't think it was just one way, like play anchor running back or play zero RB, like the field lines up for this. I really think that the way the talent was dispersed this year, you could get an early tight end, you can get an early quarterback, you could go wide receiver, you go running back. And I just think it's going to be a wide chasm of what was successful this year because the offensive talent is so much stronger. Then you add things like the kickoff rules. Kickoff rules were massive last year, kind of flew under the radar. They also extended those out touchbacks another 5 yards this season. So the coaching hires, the coaching hires were made off of these systems that are designed for the things we talked about, to combat where the current defensive meta was, to beat the Vic Fangios, right? And you're not always going to beat the Vic Fangios. Like, there's a reason those guys got their
Mhm.
jobs too. But when you see the guys that get hired, it's from these guys that, again, it's want to play with offensive leverage. They want to be able to do things that can counter. You want to be able to throw out of running sets. You want to be able to do all these things. So I look at it from this top down stance, and I'm just like, the marriage of all these things. It's as excited as I've been to get to this point in an off season.
Yeah, it's a fun thing, the big reveal and what it means, the way all these things intersect. Like you said, the stories of the coaches, the stories of the players, the stories of the franchises, and the way that I was looking at it. And how excited are we in week 1, Rich? Even when we're off the rails, we're just back to talking about football and fantasy football.
Yeah.
But it's exciting because I remember I was writing the wide receiver tiers back in like May or June. And you look at the top wide receivers, right? Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, C.D. Lamb, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Malik Neighbors, Nico Collins, Puka Nacua, Brian Thomas, Drake London. All these guys are either in the prime of their career or haven't even gotten to the prime of their career yet. And those are the top receivers. So it's just going to get better and more exciting and more interesting as these players peak. And then we do have now, like you said, with the scheming, the cluster formation thing is a good example. Because there was that point, Rich, when it was like, well, Phillip Rivers is retiring, Ben Roethlisberger is retiring, Drew Brees is retiring, Tom Brady. Like, where Peyton Manning? Like, where are the replacements going to come from? But if the offensive coordinators are doing their jobs, we don't need another generation of Hall of Fame quarterbacks. Although we kind of got it with Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes. So it is fun. But the most fun part of it is spending time with everybody that we have here on the couch, both with me while we talk football, fantasy football life, but also all of you as we're on the verge of another great journey. And like Rich said, the game refreshes us, but you refresh us too, because serving you is such a great privilege. It's an honor.
Mm-hmm.
It's a joy to serve this community. Thank you for giving us this opportunity as we're going to get to spend another season together. Rich, I say every year, I feel like I'm getting away with something, and I get away with something
Oh, it's true.
because of these people. And also because people like my good friend Rich here make it so easy to have a good time. And we have a good time with you folks. We're going to have a good time in week 1. We're going to be back. Football guys, Warren Sharp Football, all of the different content creators out there. We love that we get to spend this time with you because you're so classy.